Hey everyone! This video tutorial is for the Sunflower Embroidery Kit from Poppy Seed Creative. If you haven't purchased one of the embroidery kits and you'd like to do so, I'll put the link to my online store in the description below. These kits are perfect for beginners who want to learn how to embroider and need a helping hand. In this video, I'll be showing you everything that comes with the Sunflower Embroidery Kit, the basic stitches you'll need, and I'll also be including some tips and tricks throughout the video. So included in your kit is the 10cm bamboo embroidery hoop, the white calico material, an instruction booklet, all the thread you'll need, and an embroidery needle. So the first thing we're going to do is place the material into the hoop. To do this, we're going to unscrew the hoop, place it down like so, and then put the material over the hoop. For these smaller hoops, it doesn't matter if it's completely centered, as we do have a lot of excess material to work with. Then we're putting the top of the hoop back onto the smaller hoop, nice and even, and then we're going to tighten it. Once your material is in the hoop, we're going to go to our instruction booklet, and on the very last page is the template that we're following. So if we take our hoop and hold it over the template, we can see right through the design underneath. Making sure that our design is nice and even within the circle, we're going to get a blunt pencil, making sure not to use a pen as the ink might bleed around the material, and we're going to trace our design onto the fabric. Once you've traced your design onto the hoop and you're happy, we're going to unscrew our material from the hoop and flip it over so that the design is now on the front. When you're putting your design onto the front of the hoop, make sure it's aligned in the way that you want within the hoop. So in this case, we want all the petals to be touching the outside. We don't want to leave a big gap like that. Once your design is nice and centered, we're going to put the top of the hoop back onto our design, tighten it almost as tight as it can go, and then again, going around slowly and pinching a little bit of the material at a time. Making sure to do this the whole way round so that the material doesn't become warped and then your design will become warped. So you want to go all the way around nice and slowly. If you tighten your hoop and you find that the design is a little bit warped, you can correct it slightly, especially for this design because all of this is going to be covered and you won't see the lines underneath. So I'm just rounding out the center of that sunflower a bit, stretching some of the petals out slightly. Now for this design, we're going to be starting with the seeds in the center of the sunflower, so you'll need your needle and your thread. Now we're taking our brown thread out. Normally I would recommend to cut 30 to 50 centimeters of thread at a time. If you're a beginner doing this for the first time, I would recommend starting with 30 centimeters and then getting up to the 50 centimeters as you become more confident with the design. Taking our needle out of the holder. Now I have a big tip for threading your embroidery thread through the embroidery needle. The embroidery thread is actually made up of 6 individual strands. So what we're going to do is slightly wet the top, flatten it between our fingers, and then that'll make it a lot easier to go through that little hole at the top. So instead of twisting it to try and make it smaller, dampen the end slightly, press it really hard between your fingers to flatten it out, and then it should go through relatively easy. If it does this and splits up, you can actually just pull it through slightly with your thumb, and then it all should go through nice and easily. Leaving a 3 to 4 inch tail at the back, just so we don't accidentally unravel our needle, and that is how we're starting our project. Doing for this project is called a French knot. We're going to fill in the section of seeds with French knots, so it looks like all little balls of seeds. So when you're sewing through your material, you always want to come up and then down. Never start with a new thread by going straight down, because what we're going to do, I'm going to come up along the edge of this line here, pulling that through. Normally there are 2 options for the end of your tail. You can either tie a knot there, pull it through, and then that knot will hold your thread in place. However, because we're doing French knots, and there are going to be a bunch of little knots on top of here, putting a knot at the back might make it a bit difficult to pull the needle through. So what we're going to do is leave a tail, again about 2-3 inches long. Now to do a French knot, we're holding needle in the right hand, excess thread in the left hand, and what we're going to do is wrap it around the needle once, wrap it around the needle twice, and then we're going to put the needle down very slightly to the right of where we came up from initially. Once that needle is halfway in, we're going to move this hand to the left slightly, straightening out that thread. And then I'm going to lift this up so you can see it a bit clearer. And then we're going to pull that thread through still holding the excess thread in our left hand so it's nice and tight, so when we eventually pull it all the way through, it creates that little knot at the top. So we're going to do that again. So coming up just next to where you went down last time, because we want these to be as close together as possible so that there's no white gaps. Coming up, wrapping around once, wrapping around twice, going down slightly to the right of where we initially came up. Now, if you're having trouble pulling the needle down because you can't get a good grip, what I recommend doing, other than wearing a silicone thimble, you can actually not hold that spare thread initially. Bring the needle up and down a few times, and that will actually loosen the thread around it, and it'll make it easier to pull down. However, once that needle is down through the material, grab that excess thread and make sure it doesn't go completely loose. See how our original knot is nice and small, but the one that I let loose is slightly larger? So you want to try and make sure that all of your seeds in this area are roughly the same size. So we're going to do a few more of these just to fill in this section, and then we're going to move on to the petals. It doesn't matter if these seeds are messy as you're doing it, because really you're just trying to create a bunch of little seeds on your sunflower. When they're all together, it's going to look really good. Now I've just used all that first length of thread that I cut, so if we flip it over, you want to leave again about 2 to 3 inches of tail. The reason that we do this is so we can tie both tails together to fasten them securely at the back so the whole stitch doesn't become unraveled. So we're just tying that nice and tight, doing a double knot at the back, and then cutting off all that excess thread. So grabbing our yellow thread, going right through the middle, again cutting a length of 30 to 50 centimeters depending on what you feel comfortable with. Again, wetting the edge of your thread, squashing it between your fingers, and then it should be a lot easier to thread your needle. And once that's threaded, again leaving a decent tail at the back. Now the next stitch we're going to do is called satin stitch. Satin stitch is used to fill in an entire section so it's just one color. So when I'm filling in things with satin stitch, I like to start in the very center to create that first line, so that when we're working either side, we're keeping our lines parallel to each other and they don't become slanted as we're working. So I'm going to start with this petal here. When starting a new section next to a section that's already been filled in, you always want to start away first and then come down next to the section that's already been worked on. The reason that we do this is we don't want to come up from the section that's already been worked on, as we don't want to unravel or get tangled with any of the threads in that section. This way, going down, we're not going to get tangled. Pulling that thread through, again leaving a very decent tail at the back to work with. And then for satin stitch, we're just going to put one line down. So to make sure this is straight, what I like to do first is position it on the front of the hoop to see what angle works best. So for this one, we want to go to the very center of the petal, which is about there. So I'm going to come down as close as I can get to those seeds, so we don't leave any white gaps. And then I'm going to pull that through so it's nice and straight, making sure as well that our thread isn't twisted on top. Then again, coming up at the top, following that line on the outside, coming up, and then again right next to where we went down before, as close to those seeds as we can. Again, making sure not twisted, and perfect. Now we're just going to continue this stitch, filling in one side and then filling in the other. So this is the last stitch I know I can do, where I'll still have enough tail left over to tie to our other tail to secure those at the back. So this is what the satin stitch should look like, nice and flat and an even distribution of the color. So again, when you've got those two tails, wrapping them at the back, I like to do a double knot, which for me means wrapping it around once, wrapping it around twice, pulling, and then doing a double knot as usual, but wrapping it around twice again. So 1, 2, and then pulling that nice and tight, and I found that's the best knot to do. Now I've cut my next length of yellow thread. We're going to pretend that I filled in this first row of petals because I want to show you where we go when we get to the next row of petals. So we're going to do the one above. So again, making sure to start away from our last section, pulling it through, leaving a tail. So again, making sure to check where the center is. So in this case, it's just to the left of the previous petal. And we're actually going to go down that same hole that we initially came up with the first petal. So going down that same hole. This is a really good technique using the same holes because then you won't have the gaps of white in the middle. So again, following that pencil pattern, coming down, and then the next one over, just that top one there, and going down. And then we're just following that same pattern at the top and then using the holes we've already used underneath. And we just continue that for the rest of the petal. So just to recap for this design, we're starting from the center, doing our next row of petals, and then moving outwards until the last row of petals is complete. Now we're going to pretend that we finished this entire design, and now it's time to back our piece. Now what we're going to do first is cut some of this excess fabric away. So what we're going to do is cut in a circular motion around the hoop, leaving 1 or 2 inches of material around our hoop to work with. So what we're going to do next is some of the excess thread that we have left over at the end, we're going to cut a longer length of this. By using some of the excess thread that we have left over after finishing our piece, we're going to cut a 50 centimeter length of that, preferably using the lightest color from our kit. Next, we're going to divide that thread in half. So embroidery thread is made up of 6 individual strands. So we're going to divide it so we're working with 3 in each hand. Now that we've got 3 individual threads to work with, again, wetting it slightly, pressing it between our fingers, and then it should be a lot easier to thread as well now that there's only 3 strands, leaving a really long tail for this one as well. Now to back my piece, I like to use a folding technique. So we're going to push one section in, pinch with our left hand, and then folding that section to the right. Now we're going to take that needle and thread it through those pieces of material, pull nice and tight, leaving that tail, and we're actually going to tie this piece together. And we're going to leave that tail hanging there for now. Now as you work, your thread is going to come loose, so just make sure we're keeping it nice and tight as we work our way around. So again, folding, flatten, needle goes through, and pulling that nice and tight. And then we're going to do this the whole way around. And then once you've come all the way around, we're going to give that thread a nice little tug just to make sure it's nice and tight and all of our material is evenly spaced. Then we're going to use that original tail to tie a knot and secure that at the back. Once that's secured, you can cut off that excess thread. And then we finished with our project. Now from here, you can hang it on the wall. You also don't have to leave it in the hoop. You can take it out and put it in a frame. It's really up to you. Thank you so much for watching everyone, and happy stitching!